What happens when two beloved television personalities sit down for what should be a lighthearted conversation, but instead find themselves in the middle of an increasingly tense exchange that spirals completely out of control? What starts as friendly banter quickly transforms into something neither of them saw coming. And by the end, one of them is walking off the set entirely. This is the story of Valerie Bertinelli's explosive appearance on The Drew Barrymore Show. And trust me, you need to hear every single word of what went down. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me whose side you are on after hearing this whole thing. Because this is one of those situations where everyone is going to have a strong opinion. The Drew Barrymore Show set was buzzing with its usual warm energy that morning. The audience was settled, the lights were bright, and Drew had just wrapped up her opening monologue. With that familiar enthusiasm that defines her hosting style, she turned toward the audience, smiling wide, and introduced her next guest with genuine admiration. Valerie Bertinelli walked out to loud applause, waving, poised, and calm. She looked relaxed but polished, dressed casually elegant, and Drew greeted her with one of her signature long hugs. On the surface, everything felt friendly and upbeat. They took their seats and started exactly where viewers would expect. Drew praised Valerie's openness over the years, her willingness to talk honestly about her life, her struggles, and her growth. Valerie responded politely, appreciative but measured. Drew then transitioned to Valerie's new cookbook and what she framed as a major personal and professional resurgence. Valerie smiled, but there was a subtle hesitation in her tone when she explained that she did not really see her life in those terms. She described it as taking things day by day, not some triumphant reinvention. That was the first moment the energy shifted. Drew, trying to connect, began referencing Valerie's divorce and framed it as a turning point that led to freedom and self-discovery. Valerie gently but clearly pushed back, explaining that for her, it was not liberating. It was painful. Drew nodded but continued relating Valerie's experience to her own, talking about humor, hindsight, and growth after loss. Valerie's discomfort became harder to miss. Her responses grew shorter and more precise. She emphasized that her marriage ending was a loss, not a gift. When Valerie stated plainly that she did not like the idea that her divorce was being framed as something positive, the room grew quieter. Drew apologized quickly, but the damage had started. Valerie explained that she had always been a complete person, both inside and outside of her marriage. She was not broken and did not need to be fixed. Drew attempted to reset the conversation, acknowledging the misstep, and shifted toward safer ground by bringing up cooking and Valerie's work. For a moment, things seemed to settle. Valerie spoke warmly about her love of cooking and connecting with people through food. Drew listened, nodding, smiling. But then she veered again, wondering aloud whether comfort food and emotional healing were connected for Valerie. That question landed poorly. Valerie shut it down firmly, explaining that cooking was simply something she loved and always had. Drew tried to soften it by framing it as curiosity and psychology. That was when Valerie accused Drew of psychoanalyzing her on national television. By then, the audience was silent. Drew apologized again, visibly flustered. The interview moved on, but the tension stayed in the air, unresolved and heavy. Begins with Drew trying to recover by steering the conversation into lighter territory. But the trust between them is already cracked. She asks about Valerie's gardening, and for a brief moment, Valerie relaxes. She talks about finding peace in it, about enjoying something tangible and grounding. Drew compliments her garden, then almost casually asks if there is a special someone helping her with the planting. That single question reignites everything. Valerie's expression hardens immediately. She tells Drew clearly that her personal life is not something she wants to discuss. Drew laughs nervously and explains that the audience loves knowing if guests are happy or dating, that people are rooting for her. Valerie pushes back, pointing out that the entire interview has been spent dissecting her divorce, her emotions, and now her dating life. She says directly that this is not what she agreed to. Drew insists she is just asking questions, that this is what talk shows do. Valerie responds that there is a difference between asking questions and ignoring boundaries. She explains that she has redirected the conversation multiple times and Drew keeps circling back to the same personal topics. The audience shifts uncomfortably. sensing something serious unfolding. Drew seems genuinely confused. She explains that her show is built on openness and emotional connection, and that she shares everything about her own life. Valerie calmly but firmly states that just because Drew chooses to share everything does not mean her guests are obligated to do the same. She calls the repeated probing invasive. At this point, Drew suggests there may have been a misunderstanding about the type of interview this was meant to be. Valerie agrees and says she was told it would be light and focused on her work. Instead, she feels like she has been placed in a therapy session she never agreed to attend. Drew pushes back, saying she interviews people about their lives all the time, that it is the point of the show. Valerie counters with one of the clearest lines of the entire exchange. Connecting on a deeper level requires consent. You cannot decide to dig into someone's personal pain simply because you believe it makes good television. Drew grows defensive, referencing Valerie's memoir and past openness as justification. Valerie responds sharply, explaining that choosing to share something on her own terms is completely different from being questioned about it live on television. The argument escalates. Valerie accuses Drew of weaponizing vulnerability. Drew says she feels everything she says is being taken the wrong way. Valerie suggests that maybe the issue is not how Drew is saying things, but what she is choosing to focus on. Drew tries again to reset, asking if they can simply have a real conversation instead of constant friction. Valerie admits she no longer trusts Drew to respect her boundaries. She explains that intentions do not erase impact, and that she feels hurt and frustrated by how the interview has gone. Drew apologizes and asks if they can finish on a better note. Valerie hesitates, then agrees to talk about the cookbook again. But even when Valerie shares a simple story about a favorite recipe connected to her mother, Drew immediately pushes for deeper emotional meaning. Valerie stops her. She says plainly that Drew is doing it again. Not everything needs to be analyzed. Sometimes a recipe is just a recipe. Drew responds defensively, saying she is just curious and likes to understand people. Valerie replies that curiosity becomes exhausting when the person being questioned is actively asking for it to stop. This is where the conversation stops being uncomfortable and becomes explosive. Opens with Drew making a comment that visibly shocks the audience. She questions why Valerie agreed to come on a talk show if she did not want to talk. The reaction is immediate. The crowd gasps. Valerie looks stunned, then quietly furious. Drew doubles down, suggesting that maybe a talk show was not the right venue if Valerie only wanted to promote her cookbook without personal questions. That is the breaking point. Valerie accuses Drew of implying that she should be emotionally exposed for the audience's entertainment. Drew tries to backtrack, but the damage is done. Valerie lays out everything clearly and calmly. She says Drew has ignored her boundaries, psychoanalyzed her hobbies, made assumptions about her emotional state, and is now blaming her for resisting it. Drew insists she is not blaming her, that the show is about emotional honesty and connection. Valerie responds with one word that hangs in the air and changes the tone entirely. Exploitation. Drew reacts strongly, denying that she has ever exploited anyone. Valerie clarifies that intention does not matter as much as impact, and the impact of this interview is that she feels ambushed and disrespected. Drew fires back, suggesting Valerie is being defensive about her own life. The audience gasps again louder. Even the producer can be seen trying to intervene from offstage. Valerie stands up, removes her microphone, and says she is done. Drew panics, asking her to sit down, pleading to reset. Valerie refuses, explaining that Drew has been given multiple chances to change course and has chosen not to. Valerie explains why Drew's last comment was condescending and dismissive. She says she came in good faith and instead has been treated like a case study. Drew apologizes again, emotional and shaken, but Valerie says she needs to leave before things get worse. The producer approaches, apologizing and explaining Drew's interview style. Valerie responds that Drew's audience can expect that style from someone else today. She says she is not obligated to provide emotional content. She is a human being, not a content machine. Drew begs again. Valerie pauses, not angry anymore, but disappointed. She tells Drew she does not fully understand what she did wrong, and until she does, sitting back down will not fix anything. Drew asks her to explain. Valerie tells her she has been explaining it the entire time, and Drew has not been listening. Valerie explains that Drew prioritizes emotional moments over actually hearing her guests. She says that even now, Drew is still trying to convince her to stay instead of respecting her decision to leave. Drew finally falls silent, realizing the truth of that statement. Begins as Valerie delivers what feels like a final, composed explanation rather than an argument. She tells Drew that her interviewing style works for some people, but not for everyone. When a guest says it is not working, the responsibility is on the host to adjust. Drew quietly agrees. The producer apologizes on behalf of the show, taking responsibility. Valerie accepts the apology and turns back to Drew. She tells her she does not hate her and is not angry at her as a person, but she is disappointed and needs to leave. Drew says she understands, though she looks devastated. Before exiting, Valerie turns to the audience and apologizes for what they witnessed. She says she hopes there is still something valuable in it, about boundaries, respect, and knowing when to walk away. The audience begins applauding, slowly at first, then louder. Drew stands frozen as Valerie exits the stage. The cameras keep rolling briefly before cutting to commercial. Drew sits down, overwhelmed, while her producer moves to comfort her. The audience remains stunned, unsure whether what they witnessed was real or staged. 10 minutes of airtime remain, but the moment has already become one of the most uncomfortable scenes in daytime television.